Today we are going to be talking about a broken system, immigration, and the American dream. Before I introduce the speakers on today's call, I'd like to ask our CEO and National Director, Jonathan Greenblatt, to say a few words. Jonathan?
Hi there, Deb. Thank you very much for that introduction, and welcome to everyone who's joining us for this important conversation. I have some sort of prepared remarks, but before I do that, I'd just like to comment on the situation that's unfolded in this country in the last 48 or so hours, in the last, 8+ weeks, in the last year. And that is the hate that's been directed specifically at Asian American and the Pacific Islander community. We started to detect this at ADL last year when there were the early signs of the novel coronavirus starting to break out across the country, when people in positions of authority, rather than recognizing that we are all one, chose instead to scapegoat and to use terms that generalized about the virus. It was despicable then, and we're now seeing the damage that it's done. And in a moment today, when the AAPI community and the city of Atlanta and the state of Georgia and the whole country is grieving those whose lives were lost in the terrible attacks that took place, I also want to recognize that those aren't the first. There have been a series of violent incidents, including the brutal assault in broad daylight of a Thai American elderly man who was killed in San Francisco, as well as other assaults in Oakland, in Los Angeles, in New York. And in this moment, attacks of this type, I want to be clear, they are attacks on all of us. Harassment and violence directed at the AAPI community, I see as a direct assault on our Jewish community and on every one of us as Americans. So more than ever, I just want to say we stand in solidarity with our AAPI brothers and sisters. We are all in this together, and we are committed at ADL more than ever to just and fair treatment to all. And with that said, we'll commence with the program. I think it's fair to say that America has long been a beacon of hope, promise, and opportunity for immigrants from all over the world looking to come here to make a better life for themselves and their family. And yet immigration policy in this country has been fraught, tainted by racism, nationalism, xenophobia, and generally speaking, a fear of the other. And due to the failure of recent reform efforts led by members of Congress, and I should say, year after year after year of falling short, many of whom decried the system as broken for well over a decade, we find ourselves in a very uniquely difficult position, the likes of which we've just never seen. After watching the Trump administration for the last 4 years, the task of charting a path forward that ensures immigrants are treated with dignity, that refugees are treated with respect, and that does right by our core values as a country, seems almost impossible. We watched in horror as they consciously and maliciously attempted to limit all forms of entry into these United States based on race and national origin, all while there were a series of acute crises abroad that were driving people to this country, increasing the number of immigrants and who were in danger and coming to our shores seeking safety. And so in the absence of any kind of comprehensive federal policymaking, those who advocate for a more fair and generous system are bumping up against the forces that demonize immigrants, that slander refugees purely for political ends. And when they do so, they play into the hands of extremists whose conspiracy theories have always, again, marginalized those who are different, whether they were Jews, be they Jews, Muslims, Mexican people, other members of the Latinx community, from so on and so forth. Now, to complicate matters even further, over the past year, we've been contending with this historic coronavirus, which has killed more than 500,000 Americans. Far more citizens in our country have died than in any other around the world. And over the course of this past year, again, the AAPI violence has only exacerbated a sense of insecurity and fear. And we're still struggling with the implementation of a cruel and heartless expulsion policy that supposedly was adopted in the public interest trying to preserve public health, but of course was later exposed as fraudulent and potentially racist, with the revelation that there was zero evidence that admitting asylum seekers into this country would somehow spread COVID-19. Anti-immigrant reaction to the present national emergency has extended as far as the fine print in measures such as the CARES Act of March 2020, which denied stimulus checks not only to tax-paying undocumented workers, but to more than 5 million US citizens whose parents and spouses were undocumented. And we know that, again, this pain is directed at all communities. Jews have suffered from this. The Latinx community suffers from this today. The Muslim ban, I think, will be a stain on our national character for generations to come. It will be a black mark that history will not look kindly upon. So this is a moment when we've got to resolve this crisis once and for all. We've got to ask ourselves, where do we go from here? How do we de-escalate the pitched conflict that always arises around this and get to the common humanity of the people whose lives are at stake? And what does effective immigration reform look like? I think we're blessed today to have three remarkable people with us representing important organizations. Their voices are those of integrity and decency, and we'll do well to listen to them and learn from their leadership. Back to you, Deb.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you for setting the tone for this call. It was very important to recognize that moment. But now let us move forward with our program. For today's call, ADL Vice President of Government Relations, Advocacy, and Community Engagement, Max Sevillia, will be in conversation with Lydia Guzman, Clarissa Martinez de Castro, and Ali Noorani. A little about our guests before we dive in. Lydia Guzman is the Director of Advocacy and Civic Engagement for Chicanos por la Causa and the National Chair of LULAC's Immigration Committee. Born and raised in the Los Angeles area, where she started registering her community to vote at 17, she has built a storied career working in voter registration and immigration advocacy efforts. Clarissa Martinez de Castro serves as the Deputy Vice President at Unidos US, where she leads efforts to advance fair and effective immigration policies and to expand Latino civic engagement by helping immigrants become citizens, citizens become voters, and the community overall become an active participant in policy debates, all of which speak to her passion for strengthening civil society. Ali Noorani is President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Immigration Forum, a nonpartisan advocacy organization working with faith, law enforcement, and business leaders to promote the value of immigrants and immigration. Growing up in California as the son of Pakistani immigrants, Ali quickly learned how to forge alliances among people of wide-ranging backgrounds, a skill that has served him extraordinarily well as one of the nation's most innovative coalition builders. And with that, I'm pleased to turn the call over to Max.
Thanks, Deb. And hello, everyone. Very much looking forward to moderating this panel. Before we get started, I wanted to echo some of the words that Jonathan shared. I think that it's particularly important that we're having this conversation as we've seen tragic evidence of anti-immigrant discrimination in Atlanta and elsewhere this week. The conversation that we are about to embark about immigrant discrimination and hate crimes against minorities and vulnerable communities is more timely now than ever. And as Jonathan mentioned, I too want to stand in solidarity with the Asian American Pacific Islander community, the API community, and also recognize that the victims in Atlanta were all women, a group that also gets the blunt of the discrimination that we at ADL understand so well. I've heard from a leader in the API community yesterday that actually discrimination against Asian American women is twice as high as that of Asian American men. So to me, something very important to keep in mind. And as we go through this moment, it seems particularly important to show support, uncompromising support and allyship. And the solidarity is not enough. We've been working over the past week, really over this past year, as we've seen the rise in discrimination in support of the community, and working in partnership to change the dynamic, change the ecosystem in order to improve it and really be effective in changing the circumstances and combating discrimination and extremism. It's particularly fortunate timing that we're having a conversation about the broken immigration system, in that today, right now, as of about 17 minutes ago, as we're having this conversation, the House of Representatives is taking up immigration changes. It's the first immigration work that they do in the 117th Congress. The House is set to vote to protect undocumented immigrants brought to the United States as children and to provide legal status to farm workers. Very much looking forward to positive action that will affect over 3.5 million people that are suffering because of the broken immigration system. The last time that Congress actually took up a comprehensive immigration reform in about 2013, I was privileged to work alongside the members of this panel and their organizations, Unidos, US, National Immigration Forum, and LULAC. So on a personal level, I very much look forward to continue a conversation and advocacy and leadership that we partnered on many, many years ago. So with that, I'm going to start the conversation by asking all three of you a question with regards to how do you see the current broken immigration system, you know, the draconian sort of laws that we've seen exacerbate this dynamic over the past few years. How do you see now an opportunity to improve upon a legacy of cruel immigration that we have carried for a number of decades and have been unable to improve upon? Maybe Clarissa, you can get us started.
Sure, and thank you, everybody. It's wonderful to be with you all today in this particular moment. I'm a little bit at a loss of words. I know that we're focusing on immigration today and how the fueling of hate is expressed not only on the issue of immigration, but on against immigrants in the millions of Americans' families of whom they are members of. But obviously the issue of hate has so many different dimensions and consequences. And so again, today we'll try to focus on how it converges with the issue of immigration. I think that what Max talked about this, we have an opportunity right now to make some progress on an issue that has been stalled unnecessarily for far too long. I think one of the tragic things about the immigration issue is that morally, politically, and economically, it makes complete sense to fix our outdated immigration system and to do it in a way that is fair and humane. And unfortunately, what we have seen intensified, not only in the last 4 years, it wasn't something that just emerged then, but certainly it intensified, is the same kinds of things that we've been hearing about every immigrant group in our country when they first came, time after time. So these falsehoods are as old as time, and they are part of a tactic to divide us from one another for the purpose of distracting us actually from holding accountable elected officials whose job number one is to govern. And that is the task in front of them at the moment, that even if they decide not to take the assignment, we can play a role in making sure that they do. So these votes today, I know many of you may be thinking the House is going to vote all our expectations is that the House will be able to pass the Dream and Promise Act, which will protect dreamers, a category we've all become very familiar with, as well as temporary protected status recipients who make up one of the most vetted immigrants in our country, and also the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. And particularly over the last year, we've all become keenly aware with the role of essential workers in agriculture and elsewhere to help us all survive. So some of us may be saying, well, the House is going to pass it. It's controlled by Democrats. But I would say that wasn't always a given. It's taken a lot of work to get to that point and make that possible. So when those bills are passed today, our charge is to focus our intensity on the Senate side of Congress to make sure that they take action on two issues that have been debated and analyzed and explored exhaustively. And when we have heard members time and time again express concern and support, except when it comes to a vote. So we'll have an opportunity to demand that accountability and that action, and importantly, to make sure that we stay the course and demand responses for those who choose to deny the American public solutions that are widely supported.
Thank you, Clarissa. Lydia, can you speak about the human toll that the broken system has had, coupled with this increase in discrimination and the pandemic that we've lived through? So as we embark on immigration reform, what is the human aspect of this need for reform?
So thank you for that. There has been indeed a human toll to this broken immigration system. And when the past administration was trying to come up with ways to reduce the number of legal immigrants, they came up with these draconian policies like separation of families, and children were being yanked from the arms of women, young children crying. And so the consequence has been terrible. Now we have in our hands a situation where we have hundreds of children that we don't know where they are. We cannot connect them again with their parents. We have, and we probably never will be able to find the whereabouts of these children. And this is something that we created. These are some of the consequences of a broken immigration system where policies intended to reduce the number of legal immigration has backfired. Another such, I think, when the Trump administration, when they tried to put a stop and the stop of the asylum seekers and asking, what they did is they said to immigration, have them return to Mexico and have them remain in Mexico so that their asylum cases can be heard in Mexico. And what that did, in essence, is those families and those individuals that are seeking asylum in Mexico are staying in tents in these horrible conditions. They're being exposed to all sorts of crimes. They're falling prey to extortionists. They're being raped. They're being kidnapped. And so that is what's happening. This is the consequences has been horrible. And now what's also happening is the Trump administration also tried to reduce the number of legal immigration by punishing those who are recipients of benefits. And that was horrible. In this time of COVID, asking immigration to raise the bar on the public benefits that an immigrant would receive so that they would disqualify them for legal immigration was also horrible. And what we saw is in this time of COVID, as people were losing their jobs, they were afraid to go get tested for COVID. We have now in our hands, the situation where Latinos, we have a lot of Asian Americans, we have a lot of folks that are afraid to go get tested, afraid to go get vaccinated. And this is a direct consequence of our broken immigration system, because the last administration also tried to reduce the number of legal immigrants. And so I mean, I could go on and on about the consequences, but this has been horrible. We've seen some of the consequences besides, you know, the immigrants here, the hate crimes that we just spoke of, but there's also the fact of the matter is the level of poverty that they're living in because of these draconian policies. You know, it's just been horrible on families. And so this is something that we can do better. We as a country, we need to share this with our elected officials so that they can look at this and say, you know, immigration should not be something political. We can't turn to immigration as a political ball game where we pass the ball to each other. This is a humanitarian issue. And this is how we should have always looked at it.
So at ADL, that's how we've been engaging on the issue of immigration reform. We have highlighted the human suffering that's been associated with a broken immigration system. We've had an opportunity to hear from leaders in the immigrant community, like Congresswoman Sevillia Garcia, who participated in the Stop Hate for Profit conversation like this one a year ago, and was talking about some of the same issues that we are both seeing in the sort of like national debate and that we are discussing here about anti-immigrant discrimination and just hurt, pain, which, you know, it's very disappointing and difficult to see that a year later we are still discussing an ongoing situation with little, if any, improvement. But in moving forward, we are beginning to understand the sort of victims of a broken immigration system, but I'm encouraged. I think that what's also happening is that there is a growing element, a growing coalition that's forming that understands the problem and it's looking to engage and be a part of the solution. Citizen activists like the hundreds of people that we got on the call today. Ali, can you speak about that coalition that you see building and your leadership in bringing it forth to be actionable and participants in the change that we seek?
Well, sure. Well, first of all, I really want to thank ADL for not only pulling together today's conversation, but, you know, Jonathan, Max, Deb, Sasha, and the entire team at ADL for all the work that you do in terms of countering hate that is, you know, put against any community. And you know, I know from, I'm sure from the perspective of AAPI communities across the country, your leadership and solidarity is just great, deeply, deeply appreciated, and we're grateful. So thank you. And then friends at LULAC and Unidos, thank you very much for all that you do. And it's always great to, in this case, you know, share a screen and not a stage. So before I get to your question, Max, I wanted to actually take a quick step back because I've been thinking about the idea of dignity quite a bit. And, you know, over the course of our history as a nation, every time an immigrant leaves their home, whether that is a family leaving Honduras a month ago, you know, my family leaving Pakistan in the 70s, a family leaving, you know, in the 1940s or 50s as a victim of persecution around World War II, a Jewish family. Each of those families, they leave with dignity. Doesn't mean they want to leave, but they leave with their pride and their dignity. And what we have found over the course of time is that immigration systems, whether they are ours as our nation or other nations, those systems, step by step, piece by piece, take the dignity away from the migrant and their family. And I think what I've come to believe, at least, is that what we've seen over the last 4 years is not just the kind of ripping away of the dignity of the migrant, but along the way, I think for our nation and us as Americans, we've lost dignity as well. So we're trying to think about the path forward is how do we restore the dignity of the country, of ourselves, and most importantly, of the immigrant who is here trying to pursue their dream and really at the end of the day, live up to their fullest potential. And I start there because I think that, you know, there's so much of our conversation today will be about policy and politics, but, you know, at its core, the immigration debate is really about culture and values. And to get to your question, Max, that's how, with my partners, with our partners across the country and this incredible team of partners at the forum, we've started to create this coalition that includes leadership at a national and local level from the faith community, from law enforcement, and from business. And really, I think over the last 7 to 10 years at least, we've seen kind of step by step in communities as conservative as Idaho, to where you have conservative dairymen who have come to really know and appreciate and love the workers on their dairy farms for 10, 15 years. Back in 2007, what brought them to kind of a moment of realization that they needed to engage is that it was their own family stories as dairymen fleeing the Netherlands, again, around World War II. And there was a raid that happened at a grocery store in Twin Falls, Idaho in 2007. And one of the board members of the Idaho Dairymen's Association comes back and says, this is what my grandparents told me what happened when they were and why they left the Netherlands. So we all have stories, and how do we tap into those stories to create a different type of understanding of today's immigration debate? So like I said, this is happening in a place like Idaho. It's happening among conservative evangelical denominations across the country. Republican sheriffs, Republican mayors, or police chiefs are all asking themselves the question of, okay, what is my role in terms of advancing a constructive conversation about immigrants and immigration? And I just feel that the more ways we can have that conversation, the more likely it is that we're going to be able to ultimately pass the legislation that we seek.
Thanks, Ali. And I want to recognize that is also the ADL way. I lead the community engagement work for the organization, and the way that we seek to influence policy and accomplish our mission is very much in coalitions and allyship. And as an organization rooted in the Jewish faith, we engage the faith community often and frequently, and in partnership. We engage the civil rights community as a civil rights organization that we are. And as you all know, we have a deep partnership with law enforcement on issues of combating extremism and bias and discrimination, racism. And so we look to bring all those partnerships together in order to approach and build towards our shared goal. But no one does it as well, has the sort of expertise that Ali does on the great work of the National Immigration Forum. Lydia, can you talk a little bit I'm thinking we'll dive a little deeper into policy and politics, and I would love to hear what you see as the opportunities for improving the system through the Biden-Harris administration.
Thank you for that. I think that some of the issues that Ali just brought up, I'm very familiar with the work that Ali does in bringing, and I call it the 3 Bs because, and I'm going to put a plug in for Ali when we talk about Bibles, badges, and business. All right. And, bringing those folks together. And I think for policy now, when you talk about some of the naysayers on passing an immigration reform, whether it's the pieces that we're seeing now this week in the House or something on a bigger scale, more comprehensive, what the naysayers probably need to hear are from some of the folks that have not been our usual suspected allies, from law enforcement. There are a lot of law enforcement folks that actually agree with an immigration reform, agree with giving driver's license to undocumented folks. They agree with needing to know who is here and legalizing the folks that are here as a matter of public safety. There are lots of businesses, as Ali just mentioned, the dairy workers. You have here I'm in Arizona, and we are the lettuce capital of the country. And we, without our farm workers, we need to legalize them because our food chain would definitely suffer. But there's also other businesses that rely on the workforce. And our faith leaders, all of our faith leaders, I think those are the folks that need to help us in talking about legalizing the dreamers and talking about pushing forward a comprehensive reform, and also ensuring that the 1965 Naturalization Act on awarding asylum seekers, or allowing asylum seekers to properly make their case. And I think these are just some of the things that this country was founded on. And I think we need to have those conversations on policy. Another thing I think that I'm hoping the Biden administration will look at, I know that we need to also see the court system. The past administration made it very difficult for immigration judges to use discretion and actually put quotas on judges. And I think we need to ensure that everyone who is seeking asylum also has due process, proper due process, and due process for all of those who are currently in some sort of proceedings. But most importantly, I think that our immigration system now, the way that it is now, it is a penal system, and it should be more a humanitarian system, And that is what I'm hoping that this administration and moving forward, we should try to ensure that this agency is doing the work of, this is a humanitarian issue. And I think that this is how that agency should be working towards. So.
Thanks, Lydia. So I want to recognize that we're joined by one of the brightest strategic minds on the issue of immigration reform. And so, Clarissa, I want to go straight to you and ask to game out the legislative, political, current circumstances. How do you see immigration reform faring and happening under the current majorities and circumstances in the House, in the Senate, and with this administration?
Well, I think that everybody can probably state the following, right? It's going to be a gargantuan fight to try to get this through the Senate. But none of us are in this because it's easy. We're in it because it's necessary. And so that's why I also like to go back and remember that, as I mentioned earlier, so we are looking at 2 votes today in the House, which we all anticipate are going to pass. But we shouldn't gloss over what it took for that to be the case. Those who have been following this issue know that there's been times, years past, where similar votes were brought forth and were not able to pass the House. And so it is that stick-to-itness and that continued work to educate, to persuade, and to support members that are willing to lead on the issue that has taken us to this point. We need to take that now to the Senate. We know that there's the potential for for a majority of Democrat votes, and the potential to get all of those votes on the table. And that if we are going through regular order, meaning you need 60 votes because of the way that things have devolved in the Senate, that even if you have a majority, that's not enough. You need 60. So we need to bring at least 10 Republicans to the table. That's part of the work that Ali focuses on. Certainly Lydia, Unidos, ADL do, is try to create those bipartisan conditions, because we know that on most issues, and this has been true of immigration, that when we've been able to get to the finish line, it has actually had bipartisan support. But we also know that dynamics in the Republican Party, unfortunately at this point, means that many members who would support these solutions and who understand that the vast majority of Americans also support them are afraid of the dynamics within their own party. So the role that we as civil society play to make sure that, yeah, I know it sounds trite, right? But these offices need to hear from us. They need to be able to turn to their colleagues and their leadership and say, I'm getting calls from my constituents that we need to take care of this and we need to take action. it sounds like old school. I tell you that matters. The ability to do that, the ability to do that at home, the ability to do that in DC, the ability to connect with other grassroots leaders that they listen to and make sure that they are hearing that, whether it is in their place of worship, at their place of work, or in other settings. So civil society has a really important role to play here. And we together can figure out how to best activate that and how to create the on-ramps to make that participation possible. Because we have seen those coalitions come together in the Senate in the past, and we need to, again, solidify the conditions to make it happen. Right now, there are people looking at it at similar legislation to the one that it's going to pass in the House today in the Senate, and working on getting co-sponsors for that, as well as doing visits with other members whose votes we're going to need. And also, frankly, looking at other ways in which this issue can advance. We had talked about how in the concept in the context of COVID, and I know some of you have mentioned that in the chat, we have learned not only about how extensive the definition of an essential worker is, but also about the fact that immigrants are overrepresented among those essential workers. And therefore, as we look at different measures, through the budget, through appropriations, through other means that are looking at our COVID response, I think that there is also an opportunity to press members to avail themselves of any vehicle possible to make progress on this issue.
Thank you. I mean, you've got about 1,000 activists ready to be deployed, energized by understanding the issue better and understanding where the opportunities lie. And for them to hear straight from you, straight from this panel, the important, the relevance that they have in order to accomplish the much needed reform, it's very, very powerful. So thank you. It's
one thing I would mention, Max, yes, absolutely. Do not underestimate the power of your voice and those you can activate to join you in doing so. And also that we know that the reforms we need go further and are broader than those in these two particular bills that are getting a vote today. But we also know that those two bills, which have an inordinate amount of support, can also be the way to exercise the muscle to continue making progress to the overall modernization of the system, from those who are currently here to our legal immigration system that is needed.
Mm-hmm. And I like to also take this opportunity to do a call to action. I think all of us, and just following what Clarissa says, all of us have an opportunity to voice, and we can do letters. We can in small groups, we can visit our representatives. We can do op-eds. We can partner and seek coalitions with other leaders and have a bigger voice, because the more folks you are together working on this, there's a bigger voice. And I think this is that opportunity. And I wanted to make sure that we don't leave this panel without having a call to action.
Absolutely. And actually, that's where I wanted to go with Ali. We are proud founders of a campaign and coalition that you form, all of us. And so I know your perspective of going wide and broad. That is what's needed in order to effectuate this sort of change. And so I would love to hear from you about this sort of individuals and groups and organizations that need to be a part of this conversation, need to be activated, and to hear from you, as we heard from Lydia and Clarissa, what it would take from the participants on this call to really be allies and effectuate the sort of change that we are describing here.
Sure. Well, the amazing part about ADL is the local chapters across the country. I just saw, kind of on my Twitter feed as ADL was broadcasting information, chapters across the country were picking up the event and moving it through their respective memberships. So I think within that infrastructure, there's an incredible amount of opportunity because members of Congress, they understand who ADL is and who your membership is. So really, I would say number one is working with local ADL leadership, chapter leadership, to engage senators in the coming weeks and months. So we're going to get out of the House today. Then the House goes on a recess, and then members of Congress will be a little bit more accessible. Kind of whatever that means in the days of COVID, over the course of the Easter recess. And then when they come back from the Easter recess, was second, third week of April, is when there's going to be an opportunity to kind of apply some pressure here in Washington, D.C. But the key part about this is, what are United States senators hearing about the House bills in the next 2 or 3 weeks? So just to kind of give something concrete here, imagine if ADL chapters across the country were to be sending letters as a chapter to senators saying, these are 2 pieces of legislation that warrant your attention and, more importantly, your support. And then that just gives a sense to senators that it's, in addition to individuals who are calling them, there are institutions that individuals are members of that are also watching and weighing in, whether it's, again, an ADL chapter, a synagogue, or any other house of worship. So I would kind of offer that as an example of how to really get the focus of senators as we go into this next phase, is to kind of work through and with the institutions that you're members of.
Thank you. That's super helpful. And we do indeed have petitions ongoing to support the bills that we're describing here and some others that are important vehicles for immigration reform, and to support communities that are suffering the brunt of discrimination. And at ADL, there are opportunities to involve oneself through the national office and through the 25 regional offices. We are in the process of planning a robust fly-in, and so folks on the call interested in engaging with us and through us in order to accomplish the sort of reform that we're discussing. There are lots of opportunities, and we not only welcome, but we need your support. We need your engagement. That is truly what makes a difference. It's 3:20, and I see that we've got a number of questions. Maybe we can take some questions from the chat.
Absolutely. Thank you, Max. And thank you to all of our panelists. This has been a fantastic conversation. And you've hit already, I think, on what is definitely the most popular question in the chat, which is, what can we be doing? Our senators specifically already support this legislation. What can we do? And so we've talked about that a little, but I'm going to encourage you to continue to sort of pepper your answers with that kind of information, because folks are definitely hungry for it. And so related, and Max, maybe this is to you, a variety of people have asked to know a little bit more about the legislation that's being voted on now in terms of the numbers and what it actually is, so that they're able to better reference it. Do you think we can maybe start there?
Sure, I have it in front of me. So we're looking at the American Dream and Promise Act. That would address the Dreamers situation, as well as temporary protected status. And we're also looking at the Farm Workforce Modernization Act that will deal with 1 million farm workers and give them more rights and an opportunity to have a more established situation in the United States.
Mm-hmm. For the Dreamers, I think it's important to share with our members in the Senate the importance of we need to find a permanent solution for the Dreamers. DACA is just temporary. I think a permanent solution, but the numbers are there, and I think this is also something that will move the senators, is the importance of the economic contributions that have happened since the Dreamers have received temporary status and a work permit. So in giving them a permanent solution, we can also expand the tax base. You know, we have more people contributing to, and this will improve our economic situation. I think that's one thing also that moves a lot of the folks that might be on the fence, and I think that's important to share. So I just want to put that out.
Thank you for that. I think that's really helpful. Another question that sort of dovetails a little bit with what we're talking about. There's been a variety of questions about if we feel that this is really bipartisan legislation, and if so, why? But if not, what can we do about that? And that can be to anyone. Clarissa, do you want to start?
I'll let Ali start, and I can chime in because
Beautiful.
I know that a lot of this work of his work is particularly focused on that.
Oh, thank you. So I mean, I'll give you one clear example. Today, the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. This was a piece of legislation on the House side that began and passed last year, and will hopefully most likely pass again today. But it's important because that legislation was a negotiation between farm workers, the United Farm Workers, and growers. So I mean, that's a liberal institution and a very conservative institution. And they said, okay, we are going to sit down and negotiate the components of this legislation to make sure that farm workers are granted legal status that, excuse me, which is important to the UFW, that there are reforms to the legal immigration system, which is very important to the growers. But then they both agreed and realized that in order to get Republican votes, as well as some Democrats, they needed to be thinking about an enforcement measure. So they said, okay, if steps 1 and 2 happen, legalization of undocumented farm workers, a reform of the legal immigration system for the agricultural sector, then third, they're willing to accept the implementation of e-verification within the agricultural industry. So the reason why I think this is different at this moment is that in this particular case, you have Republicans and Democrats sitting down inside, on the Hill and off the Hill, saying, okay, this is what we want, this is what you want, this is what we both got to give. And that's built out, a pretty impressive coalition where, last year the bill got 34 Republican House members to support it. This year the expectation is anywhere between 30 and 40. And keep in mind, even a number of those 34 that supported the legislation last year are no longer in the House. So that's, I mean, I think hopefully a kind of a very specific reason of kind of why, these pieces of legislation are legitimately bipartisan. Now, of course, in the Senate, we're going to have to go through the process again, but we're not starting from scratch. And that's also really important.
Yeah, I think one of the things is that the reason why you had bipartisan collaboration on this is because different people experience the issue from different places. Ali talked about the agricultural sector and the fact that that sector would just collapse if we lost our immigrant workforce. That is true for a number of other sectors too. And that's why there are a lot of different employer groups that have an interest in seeing something done. If you look at what some may interpret as opponents of the business community in labor, the reality is that when you have workers who are vulnerable and their rights can be exploited because their immigration status can be wielded as a way to quiet their voices when there's unsafe worker conditions or anything like that, it has the potential to not only impact the rights of those workers, but all the workers around them. And that's why I think we have also seen an evolution in the labor movement, who many, many years back probably were not very open to the issue of immigration, to one that is more at the table trying to find a way forward. A lot of times we talk about immigration issues as if something that happens to the person who is an immigrant happens in isolation. But the reality is that immigrants live in mixed status families. So the treatment of immigrants actually reverberates through millions of American families. We saw this during the COVID relief debates, where there was this egregious criteria that if you had a family that had an undocumented member or somebody without a social security, the whole family would be disqualified for relief, no matter if you were a legal permanent resident or a citizen, which left hundreds of thousands of people unable to get that relief. And so it is important to look at how all of this plays together. Similarly, for those who are seriously interested in national security issues and community safety, I think that we have a false debate that has been going on for too long. First of all, the US does not have open borders, and neither Trump nor Biden nor any candidate before them or president before them has advocated for open borders. There is a stark difference of opinion between the last administration and the current administration about how we manage our immigration system to make sure that the majority of people are able to come in through legal channels rather than be forced to go around those. And that is part of the debate that we're having, which means dealing not only with folks who are currently here, the vast majority of whom, by the way, immigrants who are currently undocumented in the country have been here for more than 10 years and are part of this mixed status families, but also to look seriously at what we need to do to fix our legal immigration system in a way that protects our workers, helps our engine, our economic engine, and sets us up better for the future.
Deb, if I may contribute to this question too, I want to bring it sort of full circle in that the issue of immigration reform is a nonpartisan and bipartisan issue. It's a broken system, and it's in all of our interest to reform it and make it work. The current political circumstances, while polarized and divided, we are as a political nation. The politics in Congress and in the federal government are such that necessitate bipartisanship. If we understand the system to be broken and we are seeking reform, we need bipartisanship in order to accomplish it. And so I also want to say, let's not be distracted. Let's not have the anti-immigrant, anti-immigration reform factions. Let's not allow them to hijack the conversation. As this process of reform moves forward, starting with the House vote now and moving forward to the Senate and other proposals that are more comprehensive, we are going to hear about distractions. We are going to hear talking points that will mirror, that will mimic those used by extremists, those that at ADL we know very well. We cannot allow the hijacking of needed reform to take place. It's up to all of us to push back and make this work and accomplish what is needed for society to work better and for human beings to have a more decent, more successful, more greater contributions to our society.
Thank you, Max. And thank you to all of our panelists today. This was an extraordinary conversation and obviously incredibly timely. So I just want to thank you again for taking the time to be with us and for sharing your insights. It was really fantastic. For everyone listening, we have seen in the chat the requests for more information. You will be getting a follow-up email that also includes a recording of this call. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us, and I hope you continue to be well, and we look forward to seeing you again fighting hate from home soon.